Talking Economics, Emerging Scholars. Welcome to the podcast by the Center for Economic Research and Graduate Education, Economics Institute. Welcome to the episode of Talking Economics, Emerging Scholars, where we shine a spotlight on CERGE-EI fresh PhD graduates. Our guest today is Daniil Kashkarov, who has recently defended his dissertation thesis entitled Essays on Human Capital, Inequality, and Technological Change. Daniil's research interests lie in macroeconomics and labor economics, with a focus on life cycle modeling, skills accumulation, and the adaptation of workers to labor market disruptions. In his current research, he integrates adaptation theory from biology, ecology, and economics to analyze and predict workers' adaptation to automation, AI introduction, and climate change. During his PhD studies, Daniil has spent 3 semesters at Yale University under the CERGE-EI Student Mobility Program. Starting next academic year, he will join Universidad Carlos III in Madrid as a postdoctoral researcher. Welcome, Daniil.
Hi, Katka. Thanks for having me here. I'm really happy to participate in this podcast.
Amazing. So, I know that originally you're from Uzbekistan, but you have studied in the Czech Republic already for your bachelor's. Can you tell us more about your motivation to study economics and to study in the Czech Republic?
Okay, so I think at the beginning it was very practical considerations. My parents wanted to give me a good education. They wanted me to succeed in life, and they actually wanted me to go to some European state, to European university, and get education there. And Czech Republic, in that sense, was a good combination of quality of education, quality of life, and affordability of this education. So we decided that together with my parents on a family council that I will be going to Czech Republic, studying on bachelor's for economics, and that was the motivation, the idea.
Wow, and economics, you fell in love with economics so much that you decided to pursue a PhD afterwards?
It's very difficult to actually reflect on this, but I think it was a combination of factors. The main reason, I guess, for me to come to start PhD and to start studying at CERGE-EI was that I didn't like much change in my life. I wanted stability, and there was a tram that was taking me to the University of Economics in Prague, tram number 9, and so that was the same tram that could take me to CERGE-EI, and just few stops more, and that was the main idea, main motivation. No, of course I'm joking. So that's not how it was. The thing is that in my family, I was growing in the family of academic scientists, and the knowledge and research and education was of high value in my family. So by the closer to the end of my bachelor studies, I started realizing that maybe I can pursue the same way as my parents. But my parents and many generations of people in my family, they were academic biologists. So, but I got an education in economics, and I thought that maybe at least in economics I can follow this research path, so it could be interesting for me. Say in the last year of my bachelor's, I was for the last semester I was mostly writing my bachelor's thesis, and it was some of the best time in my life because I was fully dedicated to research. I didn't have to pass exams. I was not worrying about managing on time to come to the university. I was just sitting and making research, and I really liked it, and I thought that maybe I can do something like that for the future. Also, there were cool people in University of Economics who were actually back then students of CERGE-EI, PhD students. Those were Elena Plazonia and Kamil Kovarch, who actually saw in me a person who can potentially do something like that, and they were the ones who recommended me to try to do this, and they were also the ones who recommended me to CERGE-EI that I can be a candidate for doing something like that. So that's more or less the story.
Well, that's nice. After your story with the tram, I was like, And then after you said I enjoyed writing the thesis and not having any exams. Well, the first 2 years at CERGE-EI is exams and a lot of studying. So was the short change in the tram ride route worth it?
Well, it was also free education and stipend. That's we should not forget about that, and a very, very high level education actually. So of course it was extremely challenging in the first couple of years, in the first year especially. But at the same time, there was this feeling of excitement. I had the feeling that I'm kind of participating in something really big. So I don't know, I liked imagining that I'm participating in a space shuttle program, that I have to work a lot. I'm doing something really, really big. And the feeling of this excitement that I'm somewhere on the frontier of at that time, it seemed to me the frontier of human knowledge. Of course, it was just the frontier of my knowledge. So it gave me enormous motivation. I was studying throughout nights. It was like this excitement was making me to do this coding until my eyes were getting red, and so on and so on. So this feeling of being on the frontier of my own knowledge, it was amazing. And the feeling of moving it forward every time, this was something that was motivating me a lot.
Oh, that's nice. So you managed to go through the first 2 years and get to the phase that you enjoyed and you were looking for, your research. So did you know right from the start what you wanted to focus on? And so can you tell us something about the research that you started to work on?
So right at the start, I was considering something that, well, it was actually one of the challenges that when you are coming just with the background of bachelor's, you are not quite sure what you're gonna do. You haven't seen much of the world. Some of my group mates, they had professional experience, they had master's degrees, or they were working in central banks and institutions. I didn't have this background. The only thing that I knew is that I liked studying everything that is related to the skills of workers, how workers are investing in their education, how they are signaling their employers their productivity and things like that. And that's something that was actually related to my bachelor's thesis. So and at the beginning, that was the main moving force. I also somehow realized that in building this skill investment decisions and skill choices could be interesting in the context of macro labor economics. And there was, I guess, a turning point. It was at the end of the second academic year when we were participating in the second year research proposal competition, and there was some significant monetary prize, which was motivating me a lot. And also it was a time before like few months before our initial defense of the ideas that we were supposed to have for PhD. So I started thinking seriously about what I want to do and started formulating this research proposal. And I came up with the fact that I'm interested in this modeling, the life cycle modeling, the accumulation of skills over the life cycle in the context of macro models. And then I was participating in this competition, and this is something that I guess the point at which we started communicating with my supervisor, my current supervisor at CERGE-EI, with Marek Kapička, whose supervision was, I guess, also very inspiring and allowed me to refine further my interests.
Okay, so you already came up for the research competition. So did you come up with a specific idea of what you wanted to pursue?
Preparing for this research competition, I came up with the draft of my first paper, which then later on became a part of my PhD thesis. So in this sense, it helped a lot. In the first couple of years at CERGE-EI, I was focusing on how workers are responding to technological change. As you mentioned, I guess, at the beginning. So more specifically, I was interested in the responses of workers to automation and what are the implications of those responses. So in my research, I was and I am combining the theoretical models of where workers are deciding how much to invest to their skills, how much time to dedicate to learning new skills, how to choose occupations, with the individual level data describing how real workers are actually doing this. To be more specific about this approach that I'm using and many other researchers in my field are using, is the approach is to write theoretical models which reproduce the key mechanisms that define workers' decisions, and then adjust or tailor these models in the way that they reproduce the most important patterns that are present in the data. Say in the data, the earnings inequality is increasing over the lifetime of workers. So for the workers who are older, we observing more of earnings inequality than for the workers who are at the beginning of their working lifetime. I would alter the parameters of a theoretical model until the simulations of this model reproduce the shape and the level of this inequality over the lifetime. Once the simulations of theoretical model are able to reproduce these patterns in the data, then we can say that this model is a sensible representation of the reality. And here the most interesting part starts. So we can use these models to simulate alternative realities, where some of the key parameters or mechanisms are different from what we have in the baseline model, and we can compare the implications of the simulated models with the baseline one. So, for example, we can switch off automation in our model and see what would be the implications for inequality over the lifetime in terms of earnings of workers. Or we can assume that workers all have the same learning ability and see what would be their career path, let's say, in over their lifetime.
Mm-hmm. And so you're looking mainly at the changes, automation, and are you also looking at the consequences of artificial intelligence? I suppose that's too early, right?
Well, there are already attempts to understand what would be the implications or what are the implications. In this initial research that I was conducting in the first couple of years, it was mainly focused on the implications of automation, because this is something that has been happening for several decades. There was enough time for us to understand what are the implications on the data, and there was enough time to gather enough data to calibrate those models and try to estimate the effects which I was mentioning.
So over these years, was the automation progressing? Was there more automation going into different job occupations?
I see. So the automation was gradually getting more and more intensive, given that the computer is closely related to the computational capacities that we can produce, and it was getting stronger over the years.
So can you tell us the results of your work, of this initial work?
Okay, so following this approach that I described, so in my first paper, I show that the responses of workers with higher learning ability in the automated so-called routine occupations, the responses of those workers who adapt to automation by accumulating additional human capital or additional skills and eventually switch to the occupations which benefit from automation, from non-routine cognitive occupations. The responses of those workers, they significantly dampen an automation-induced increase in the non-routine cognitive wage premium. And what is cognitive wage premium? Non-routine cognitive wage premium is basically a gap between the average wages in occupations that are automated and the occupations that benefit from automation. In the second paper, co-authored with my PhD colleague Valentin Artemyev, we used the individual level data, combine it with the data on the job ads, and show that in the course of automation, the disappearance of a subset of automated routine occupations used as stepping stones can decrease the chances of workers from younger cohorts, from more recent cohorts, to progress towards high-skilled occupations later in their life cycle. So there was a set of stepping stone occupations which were automated, but those stepping stone occupations were used to progress towards high-skilled occupations. And as a result, workers had lower chances to end up in high-skilled occupations later on in their lifetime. And so, for instance, in our current quite preliminary estimates, we show that occupations, the disappearance of these stepping stone occupations, they led to at least 1.37, 1.4 million lost high-skilled workers who instead got stuck in these lower-skilled occupations.
We're talking about the US data.
We're talking about the US data, yes. So I should have mentioned at the beginning that the models that I'm working with and the data that I'm working with is the US-based data.
And so with this loss of the stepping stones, do you think that this is where education actually can step in instead? And is it possible that education would actually replace these jobs that before served as the kind of career path or stepping?
Yeah, exactly. So the way how it works in our model is that actually workers who had lower initial amounts of skills, lower initial amounts of human capital, aka education, we can treat it also as education, as one of the dimensions of education, they were the ones that were using the stepping stones.
Okay, now going back to your studies, you spent 3 semesters in the US at one of the best schools they are, at the Yale University. Was it difficult to get there? And what was the impact on your studies? Did it help your work? Did it change your work?
So I guess getting there was challenging, but it was doable with the help of my supervisor here at CERGE-EI, who had a lot of contacts with different professors and who realized that for me it would be nice to join this large department where there are a lot of macroeconomists and labor economists. So he put a lot of effort to get me there, thanks to Marek. And in terms of the effects that it had on me, on my research, it had a transformative experience. Of course, it was extremely beneficial for me to discuss my research at that point with the leading economists in my field, with Joseph Altonji, with Kostas Mehir, with Atsio Athanasiou, and with many others, communicating with the advanced PhD students at Yale and also gathering feedback on what I did by that moment. But most importantly, this visit to Yale Economics Department helped me to find my own research path. So after one of my presentations on Yale Macro Lunch Workshop, my host at Yale, Professor Alex Savinsky, came to me and said that, well, basically my papers are about adaptation of workers to labor market disruptions. And why not to take it to a higher level and to try to formulate a general theory of workers' adaptation? And another twist to this is that, well, if we think about it, the field which was the most concerned with the adaptation theory are the biology and ecology. So those are the sciences that were explaining the adaptation patterns, explaining and predicting adaptation patterns across a broad variety of contexts, and were doing so for 200 years. Why not to try to look there for the insights and for potential new approaches? So after that, I spent more than 2 years on reading the literature in biology and ecology, everything from Darwin and early geneticists to modern quantitative biologists and ecologists. I was discussing a lot my ideas with not only with economists but also with the biology and ecology professors from Yale, from UT Austin, from Max Planck, from LMU Munich. And so all of these efforts were put into finding some approaches and insights that could be novel and at the same time applicable in the context of economics.
Mm-hmm. So, wow, major amount of work. What did you achieve so far in bringing this adaptation theory in biology, ecology, and economics together?
So it was not an easy process, as you can imagine it. Well, first in my bioecon crossover, I focused on the adaptive responses, the adaptive differences within species. So the modern view of biology is that individual differences in behavior can be adaptive. There were studies comparing the slow adaptive responses versus fast adaptive responses in birds. I was reading a lot of those studies. this is something that aligns a lot with economics, where we also study individual level decisions, individual level responses. But the problem was that the analytical tools that they are using, they are already used largely in economics. So there was no novelty here. Another approach was to look at some main trade-offs which biology and ecology are saying that driving the adaptation. But again, economics is all about trade-offs, and it's difficult to bring something new. So another approach would be to look at the predictions to which they are arriving, to which biologists and ecologists are arriving, based on their vast experiences over many decades of studies. So, and this approach turned to be more productive, and that's the one that I'm pursuing right now. So in my current research, I'm using this approach by looking at the predictions that biology and ecology arrive, and I try to bring adaptation theory in biology, ecology, and economics together. To this end, I extend an economic model of workers' decision making to account for the characteristics of the environment that are considered to be the most important in adaptation theory in biology and ecology. So that's the conceptual contribution in my current work of biology and ecology. Two key variables allow biologists to impose structure on the analysis of adaptive responses across broad variety of contexts, from cells to species to the groups of species. So the first variable is the time scale of environment variation. It's the frequency with which the environment is changing. So we can imagine as the frequency of changing temperature, we can imagine the frequency of the changing intensity of the daylight. In the context of labor markets, in the context of labor economics model, the frequency, the time scale of environment variation is the frequency with which workers are facing the change in the skill requirements. So how frequently the jobs and the associated skill requirements for them are changing. The second variable is the predictability or control over the environment. This is the variable which is capturing how predictable is the future change in the environment. For instance, if the worker can surely say that in 10 years she will be employed in a particular occupation which would feature a particular set of skill requirements, then this environment is predictable. If the worker doesn't know where she ends up in the next months or in the next year, and does not have enough information about the future skill requirements, then this means that the environment that the worker is facing has low predictability, and it's less controlled in a sense. So extending this extended model, I calibrate on the US data, on individual level data, and use it to quantitatively evaluate the adaptation predictions from biology and ecology. Informing the model, the economic model, by the adaptation theory from biology and ecology allows me to answer several general adaptation questions. So the first one is, how do workers adapt to different labor market environments? So the prediction, the basic prediction of adaptation theory in biology and ecology is that these different combinations of time scale and control over the environment, they are defining the different ways in how organisms are adapting to the changing environment. So in the context of labor market model, the environments can be occupations in which workers are spending most of their lifetime, or industries in which workers are employed, or let's say the local labor markets can be also the labor markets for different educational groups. So what I find in my studies is that there are basically, depending on these two key variables, there are three distinct adaptation modes. And these adaptation modes, the ways how workers are adapting to different kinds of environment, they are very similar to what is predicted and observed in biology and ecology. For instance, the workers at the lowest levels of predictability of the environment, they are adapting by investing a lot into their cognitive skill to protect themselves against the future variations in the skill requirements. This is something that is also observed in nature, when certain species are investing into their characteristics that would not necessarily be useful in the future periods, in the coming periods, but at the same time they can protect them against the large variations in the environment.
Can you give examples?
For, let's say, the European starlings, this is the bird which we can see a lot in our European cities. They are shown to invest into the offsprings of the both genders, even if the environment is very unpredictable. So they are facing very uncertain and poorly predictable environment with very low conditions, and still they are investing into the in the male and female offsprings. The classical theory suggests in biology that they should invest into the offsprings which have the lowest costs of breeding, and in case of starlings, those are females. But but at the same time, what we observe is that they're investing into females and males. And the reason is that if the environment improves at some point, it's extremely costly not to have the offsprings of the both gender, because it's not possible to multiply anymore. And that's one of the examples.
And can you give me an example from the labor market?
So from the labor market, actually, the nice feature of the model that I'm developing in my study is that it allows me to directly map occupational categories into these different adaptive response modes. And what I find after calibrating after estimating the model is that workers from managerial occupations, or maybe in our context it would be more relevant to talk about the workers from social and natural science occupations. They are the ones in the least certain environments. And the interpretation is that we as researchers, we don't know what kind of skills we will be required for our future projects, but not being able to perform certain tasks for us as researchers would be extremely costly, and we need to maintain certain level of high level of cognitive skills. We need to invest into them to be able to perform different various kinds of tasks. At the same time, we can, for instance, say that at the intermediate levels of environment predictability, workers are not investing much into their cognitive skill. They are just choosing the occupations which more or less match their present skill set, and then, like chameleons, by the way, they are adjusting gradually through learning by doing to the skill requirements that they are currently facing. And that's basically the first prediction, the first result. And the second result is that, like, the second question that can be asked with this model is what features of labor market shocks make it difficult for workers to adapt to. So we saw a lot of these critical changes such as automation, to which workers had difficulties to adapt. What is the general feature of this labor market disruptions which are problematic? And so biology and ecology suggest that most of the changes in these two variables, two key variables, time scale and control over the environment, or predictability over the environment, they are innocuous. So the workers, or originally the organisms, they can easily adapt to relatively large changes in environments. However, there are certain thresholds after which it gets much more difficult for organisms to adapt. Those thresholds are called tipping points, and they are present on the borders between these distinct adaptation modes. I said earlier that we find that there are 3 distinct adaptation modes, so switching between these adaptation modes is difficult. It requires the development of whole new adaptation mechanisms. In the context of model, going back to automation, let's say, the workers who were previously employed in automated occupations, in production, in construction, in other occupations, they were facing the environment with intermediate predictability, with intermediate levels of predictability. And once automation came, their environment suddenly got less predictable, and they basically had to switch from one adaptation mode to another. They had to switch to the adaptation mode in which we are, the researchers and social scientists are. So it was difficult for them to develop new ways of adaptation. Mm-hmm. And the third result, and potentially the most interesting, is that it helps to answer the question what forges the adaptive capacity of workers. So the prediction is that the adaptation of organisms is forged at the highest level of environment variability. This is something that I partially find in the model, but also biology and ecology suggest, and they show it on the data, that there is a so-called bimodality in adaptive responses. So organisms that are facing highly unpredictable and highly variable environments, they are either choosing to be super flexible, they're investing into being super flexible to be able to adjust to everything, or they are starting to rely on certain characteristics that would give them some minimum amount, subsistence amount, no matter what is the environment. And what I find in my economic model is that at the highest levels of environment variability, of labor market environment variability, there are some of the highest skilled workers, such as managers, scientists, and others, as well as some of the lowest cognitive skill workers. For instance, the workers in cleaning and maintenance occupations. So the distribution of cognitive skills that workers are using and that workers have, it has kind of a bimodal shape. There are a lot of high cognitive skill workers and a lot of low cognitive skill workers, and in the middle there are not many in these highly variable environments. At the same time, if our labor market environment is more predictable, then we see that the majority of workers are somewhere in the middle, so they have some intermediate levels of cognitive skills. So that's the third prediction, and the third quantitative evaluation of the prediction from biology and ecology.
Amazing and super interesting. This seems like a topic for not only one paper. So is this, are you done with the research, or are you planning to expand it in your future endeavors?
So the idea is to have the whole research agenda based on a general approach of looking at what biologists and ecologists are doing and trying to adapt it to the needs of economists. Specifically with respect to this paper, there are plans to develop it further to predict, for instance, the adaptation of workers in the context of climate change. So to analyze a set of occupations, in terms of their susceptibility to climate change, and to use this framework with distinct adaptation modes to say where workers are most likely to end up after they are being exposed to the adverse effects of climate change. But of course there are other plans and there are other fields in biology which I would like to pay attention to. If we have time, we can talk about it. Yeah.
No, it would be fascinating. I think we are really majorly out of time, but just one question that I really am curious about. Every scientific field has its own language, its own methods, and now you're combining economics with its world, and you've lived in the world for quite a while. But biology, it's an entirely different world. How can you talk to biologists? How can you understand their papers? Was it difficult?
So what I noticed in terms of communicating with biologists, they're extremely nice people. So it's very, very pleasant to talk to them every time. And when they hear you, you are talking about, they immediately start suggesting some extensions. They immediately start saying that we can look at it from this perspective, from another perspective, and in a sense, they're sharing your own excitement. So if you're coming to them excited, they're also excited themselves a lot about what you're talking about. And it seems to me that they are always glad and happy to help to people who are interested in their results and trying to adapt them, and they understand the difficulties that a person may face. In terms of language, yes, it took a lot of time to understand the language, to understand the terminology. As I said, I spent like more than 2 years reading all the literature. One of the advantages of biological literature is that their papers are much shorter than in economics. So you're opening a paper from American Economic Review, it's like how many, 40 pages plus, I don't know how many pages of the appendix. and all the most important parts are in the appendix, as we know usually. But in biology, they are used to writing in a very concise way, and so their papers, I don't know, I can read 3-4 papers in a day, and to create some basic understanding of a particular topic in biology, like some very, very preliminary one. In economics, it would take much longer.
Thank you. I think with this, I would like to wish you good luck with continuing your research in Madrid, and thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you.